all the nursery rhymes that we could have learned in our indigenous context that we don't no longer have, So we're in a desperate attempt now to collect those and to document them. And really, our grandmothers, most of whom have passed away, but there are a few still remaining, may Allah give them health and protection. There are biological archives that are keeping our history alive. And if we don't absorb as much as we can, our languages and our traditions and our nursery rhymes are in danger.
Yeah. This is Selam and Hello, where stories of joy and justice vibrate with the rhythm of Africa and the diaspora.
We're worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then, we say, hold on.
Salam and hello, everyone. My name is Lilly Piper, and as always, I am so happy that you're with us today. Each week over the last month or so, we have been talking about the case for hope. And through the lens of hope, we've examined many different topics and heard from many different experts, people who have challenged our thinking, who have inspired us, who have invited us into their world of expertise. And at least for me, I've really been lifted by these conversations. So I could not be happier today to bring you the next conversation in our series with some of my dearest friends in this entire world, people I truly consider family. You met Sajda and Amin last year when they joined the show and had an episode called The Revolution Will Be Taught. You loved that episode. We heard from so many of you from all over the place about what their words around teaching, around parenting, around being intentional, about the communities that we're creating, the words that we're using, the images we're allowing into our homes, into our minds, into our imagination, what they mean, the impact they can have. And since that conversation, the conversation has really continued. Actually, Sajda and Amin have been a huge help to me as a creator to think about the kind of content I'm putting in, suggesting ideas and guests. If you listen to the Baba the Storyteller episode, that was all Sajda and Amin who invited him into my conversation. And I'm so grateful for the ways that they continue to shine light on the things that matter. So in today's conversation, I asked them to come back and be a part of this series because if you listen to the last one, you'll remember they are not only dedicated educators, but parents and also members of a community that they really value, a community in the diaspora, all over Canada, where they've spent many years, and back here in the continent, in their native Sudan and beyond that. They have invested deeply in what it means to be an educator, what it means to be an ally, what it means to be somebody who is committed both to the ways of our ancestors, but also making sure that we create a path for the next generation. So I've asked them to come back today to continue to talk about their work that they started through their company, Indigenous Education, a play on the word Indigenous, and how the value of Indigenous knowledge and wisdom should be part and parcel of the way we continue to learn and grow. So today's conversation is wide open. We're going to re-explore some of those themes around education, around parenting, around building community, and also going to hear what they've been up to since they were last here and how their thinking and their work has continued to grow. So Sajda and Amin, first and foremost, thank you for being you and for being who you are to me and so many, and thank you for coming back.
Thank you, Lily. It's a pleasure is all ours, and we're always humbled by your words. It's really beautiful.
Well, the joy is truly all mine.
Santi.
Brother Amin, always such a joy to have you here. So, since you were last here, it's actually been quite a while. If I remember, it was early 2023 that you were here. So we're over a year ago. And we have actually continued to have a conversation since that time around the themes of Indigenous education, around community centers and what we could do here in Nairobi together, collaboratively, how to bring the arts and music into places where we feel like, brings empowerment. We have been together in moments of protest. We've been together in moments of joy and celebration. And so in the last years, you've thought about your own journey and some of the political movements that we've been witness to. What's the last year felt like to you in your role as educators, of advocates, of parents? What has this last year been like for you? A big, heavy question, I know, to start.
Yes. Let me think about that. I feel like the need to focus on the positive and the beauty and some of the things that have given us life. But I can't help also but be honest about the fact that this last year has been really, it has been a heartbreaking year. If we think about globally what is happening on the continent, obviously in our beloved Sudan, but when we look east as well to Palestine, I think one thing for me, I've never been a social media person, and I think I've definitely been glued to my social media in an unhealthy way. But I think there's two pieces to that. I feel like part of it has really kind of taken over me in the sense that it's the first thing I look for, the last thing I look for before I go to bed, just in terms of checking in on what is happening to our people globally and just bearing witness to all of that. And so part of that has been paralyzing in the sense that I think it might be the first time in my life where I'm just taking things in and unsure of how to even move. And at the same time, I've learned and I've met a collective global family that I'm like just in awe of. So, seeing young people on TikTok, seeing people on Instagram, seeing, young and old people coming to terms and transforming the way that they think about the world, I feel like we've reached a tipping point. And I think that multitude of people who have now come online and said, oh my goodness, I did not know. I did not know. And so people really sharing their truths in that way I feel like it's kind of brought me into a global family that I didn't know exist. In so many ways, I felt like some of the ideas I have are very isolated and we felt alone in a lot of ways. And then you go online and you're like, we are not outnumbered. Right? We're not, like Malcolm X said, we're not outnumbered, we're out organized. And I feel like this last year has really showed me that.
How about for you?
Yeah, it's definitely been bittersweet, but also humbling, you see. And also trying to strike a balance, between being honest and transparent with our children and our students, but also protecting them to a certain extent. So, much of our reality has been really hands-on, working with immediate family, trying to ensure their safety, the continued education of their children, their relocation, shelter, food. And so in a sense, we also acknowledge and are grateful for what we call the gift and the curse. The fact that we've gone through the refugee and immigrant experience very early in our lives, which deprived us of much of what we are longing for in terms of that extended family connection, but also that cultural immersion. And yet it has put us in a position to advocate from the periphery, from the outside, but ironically also from the center, but also ensured our safety. And has given us the privilege, intellectual capacity, but also the economic means to support in ways that are meaningful. So it has been taxing. And as you know, there's no playbook. There's at times, much tension and conflict. But as long as, I think we keep hope alive. And for us, hope really is manifested in the youth, in our children. And really when we center our children and center their well-being, it puts us in a position where we are always trying to be our better selves as parents and as educators and as members of the community, and it is our hope and firm belief that if societies on a macro scale truly center children, everything else falls into place.
That's a really powerful guiding thought or principle to think about. If we center children and make our decisions economically around climate, around, infrastructure, around kids. Even when I say infrastructure, I think, do kids have a safe way to walk to school, right? If we plan the city around that, maybe that would impact the welfare of the city. You're making me also think about when my kids were younger, my kids are much older than yours, probably the political movement they remember the most maybe is the murder of George Floyd and the months following that. I'm just trying to see if that's right, but that feels about the right time where they first all now went to protests, took a knee, put themselves in harm's way with a lot of protection. as much as you can kneel in front of the U.S. Embassy and feel like you're protected, but and as a parent, yes, juggling this thing of I want to preserve their innocence and view of the world as long as possible, and yet we know that this is necessary for them to be involved. So when you're making those decisions around this moment politically, this moment in history for our communities, and talking to your kids about it. There's no playbook. So how are you explaining this moment for Sudan, for Palestine, for the broader communities that we love?
Yeah.
How to move in this moment? And so, Sajda, I'm going to adjust your mic just a little bit.
Sure. So, we have young children, as you just mentioned, but at the same time, we teach children who are a little older.
Yeah.
And one thing, an observation I've been making in the last few years, when we're looking at mental health issues amongst adolescents and teenagers, and because we work so closely with that age group in schools, one thing that I'm coming to learn is that, the sheltering of children from the truth doesn't actually yield the results we think it's going to yield. Because something happens when you become an adolescent where you realize, okay, I'm kind of past the fairy tales and the nursery rhyme stage, and I'm coming into this space where I'm understanding things. And obviously we know that they can access the internet and learn the stories from there, right? Without our guidance, without our protection. And I think what we're noticing amongst adolescents and teenagers is that there's a deep sadness when you feel injustice and when you feel, when you fall into that space of despair.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes we think, let's shelter them. The amount of times we've heard adults say, well, we don't want to talk about race yet. We don't want to talk about political conflict yet. They're too young. They're too young. And then what ends up happening is they soak in all of this pain, whether we want to accept that or not. And without having those conversations and those avenues and feeling that I can actually make a change, I can feel empowered to do something, whether it's draw a picture to process or whether it's go to a protest. I think that action, that ability to say, come with me, like we're going to pull you into this and we're going to talk this through and we're going to show you how we can actually do something.
Yeah.
The absence of that we've seen leads to a very deep despair amongst teenagers. And I really think that despair is rooted in the fact that their hearts and their souls know what is good.
Yeah.
And without seeing that example from adults about what do we do? What are we actually going to do? It's a very slippery slope into despair. So I kind of think about the opposite. Well, what if we don't tell them? What if we don't talk to them about this? It's not like they're not going to find out. The difference is that they don't have that guidance and they don't have those day-to-day reminders of we have to get up and we have to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It makes me think about some of the practices in our cultures where particularly grief is really shared. I mean, there's, at least in the Ethiopian tradition, markers, 40 days, there's just calendars where you come and you wail and you weep openly.
Yes.
And the point is collectively, because if we do not do this collectively, there's a disruption to our humanity if we don't.
It's a form of therapy.
Yeah.
There's a big emphasis, I think, also on language. Language is powerful and it allows us to make sense of our reality, but also to shape our reality, And I think dialogue with children and with everybody is key, and answering questions, but also equipping our children with the necessary language to manage their emotions, to be critical, to understand, to interrogate, to be able to express their worries, their concerns, their feelings, helps them process their feelings, and grow in that regard.
Yeah. How do you make the call around the language you use, though? Because I think in all of these circumstances we're talking about, and it could be micro and macro both, there are choice words that are mainstreamed maybe in terms of protest or resistance or just even grief, either wherever we're sitting with the moment. And then there are words that are rooted in our culture and tradition that we may want to frame for our kids. So I'm just curious if I can pick your brains. Maybe I'll apply this for my grandkids since it's too late for the other ones. But what are some language that you use to help them make sense of this? What is the words that you're using, especially when you think about there could be easily a dichotomy set where they're the good guys, we're the bad guy, or we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Like this us versus them kind of thing, which is so many times how the media frames it. How do we avoid that so that there's actually understanding for our kids? Have you found ways that work?
Yeah.
So in many ways, the language that you operate in or that you think in, it frames the way you think. And so when you're introduced to other language, you're introduced to other ways of knowing, other ways of making sense of reality and other concepts. So for example, in the Arabic and the Islamic tradition, there is something called fitra, and that's like the essence, I think. Is that okay? Is that a decent? It's like the essence of the human when they're born, their natural disposition before being tainted by a society. And in many ways, we tell our children, like human beings are born with a clean, natural disposition, any baby, and all people are longing for the same things. Everybody's longing for a sense of belonging, for security, for love, and it's the trajectory and the upbringing. And most importantly, I think the most fundamental and essential pedagogical tool that's indigenous, but also manifests itself in many contemporary ways, storytelling, right? The stories that we have learned throughout our lifetime shape our reality, shape how we perceive things, So more importantly than the specific words, which are powerful, because when we speak to our children, we speak to them at our best capacity. And if there's something that they don't understand, we try to break it down at an elementary level or whatever is appropriate to them. We don't do baby talk, you see? But more importantly, the specific words are the stories. Because the stories shape everything. They shape our knowledge of self. They shape our communal knowledge. They shape how we perceive reality, how our interactions with people. We are surrounded by stories.
Can you give us an example, like bring that home for us? When you're saying, are you talking about like, so your grandfather did this? Is it more like it's a proverb, it's a folk tale? What do you mean by stories?
Well, I want to take it back a step before we go into that question of what do we mean by stories. But I feel like too, and I'm hearing you speak, Amin, and I'm thinking about the fact that we're currently operating obviously in English. And so for many of us, specifically in this time period, brown and black people, English has almost washed out our recollection of even, the ways of our parents, the ways of our ancestors, and we're operating in English. So when you ask that question about what is the language we use, of course, we try to be age appropriate. We try to teach a lot of things through stories. So rather than saying, this is what's happening in the world, we might give an example through a story. But I think one thing that we really try to focus on is being very critical of the language in which we're operating now. So if the kids say, for example, I heard that, third world countries, XYZ, we might stop there and say, well, what is a third world country? And who decided that that is a third world country? Yeah. That's a very accessible conversation to have with almost any child, right? Where did we get that language from? Does that language serve us? What does it do? What does it make it seem like? So I remember when I, almost coming into adulthood, I learned that brown and black people make up 2/3 of the world, if not more. I thought that we were a minority because we kept using that word, right? Yeah. Minority people and minority this and minority that. When I understood that we are the collective, that changed the entire narrative for me. And it also made me feel empowered, right? So when we think about a conflict and we think about the fact that a lot of us are bound by English, then the tool becomes, how do we question the English then? How do we question the language that we use to talk about ourselves in the situation we're in? And I think that's a situation where kids can participate in that question because kids love questions. So they're happy to be like, well, and so now I feel like even our kids are kind of like, well, who said that that's really what it, and we're like, okay,
question for question.
I'm just saying eat your dinner, that's all I'm saying.
We teach them things like the so-called first world.
Right.
Because as far as we know, we were the first.
Yeah. I mean, you've seen that map in our house, right? Where Africa's north. Yes. Like, who said Europe was north?
So it's that questioning and it's that criticality. It's that is what I think all kids can participate in. Yeah. And I think that's also important for us to know that sometimes we won't have the words, and oftentimes we don't have the words.
Which is the stories things. I think you see the stories coming in. It'd be helpful there.
To talk about, the importance of storytelling and our dispositions and our orientations towards people and towards land and culture. A big part of it, for example, is we reflect about, all the nursery rhymes that we could have learned in our indigenous context that
Yes.
we don't no longer have.
Yeah.
You know, so we're in a desperate attempt now to collect those and to document them. And really, our grandmothers, most of whom have passed away, but there are a few still remaining. You know, may Allah give them health and protection. There are biological archives that are keeping our history alive. And if we don't absorb as much as we can, our languages and our traditions and our nursery rhymes are in danger.
Yeah.
Take Rain, Rain, Go Away, for example. Come back another day because little Timmy wants to play.
Johnny, actually.
Johnny,
is that how the last
Timmy,
part goes? Okay.
Sandy,
Johnny wants to
whoever
play.
it is. Now, children, what does that do to them? How does that internalize their relationship with the rain?
Yeah.
They perceive the rain as an obstacle for their enjoyment, as opposed to understanding that the rain is sacred
Yeah.
and that the fruits and the strawberries and the mangoes and the ndizi that you're enjoying is a result of that rain.
Yeah.
We should be begging the rain to stay. You understand? So now think about that, multiply that now over a lifetime.
It's a different world.
And I love that point. And I just want to say, too, going back to the idea of being critical, which is what we want to teach our kids to be, despite the language issues or whatever. That example itself, and Amin and I do a lot of work with regards to nursery rhymes and the stories that we expose students to and the stories that we expose our children to. And come to find out, right, that a nursery rhyme like that has a very particular context, right? It's coming out of a European context, specifically a situation, I think, between Britain and Spain, because we've done this research. And, you know, it's a very, very specific nursery rhyme that suits a particular demographic in a place and time. And then when we think about the fact that it literally has nothing to do with us, and that becomes the only nursery rhyme that we sing to our children, or amongst these nursery rhymes that we sing to our children, it's actually so heartbreaking that it's like, well, what happened to our stories? And where is our reality? That is not our reality, right? Especially people of the continent that truly view the land as sacred and the fruits of the land. I know that in our mother tongue, when it rains, everybody says this is a blessing, right? This is barakah, right? There's a completely different view on these things. And so I think that's also what unearthing our indigenous ancestral stories allows us to do, is it allows us to reframe our minds, because we know that they've been occupied by stories that are just not our stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you mention the rain, it just brings to mind how many practices, you know, have been discovered from indigenous communities around how they steward the earth and how they steward land.
Yes.
And some of the places that there's a big story right now in Tanzania where the Maasai are being removed from their land because an Emirati family, I believe, wants game hunting, because in Tanzania it's legal to hunt game. And so they're clearing off Maasai off of thousands of acres and hectares. And you just think, this land, these game are only here for you to hunt because they have preserved and shepherded them through their practices over years, you know? And what are we losing in the process of this development in time? It's quite actually scary and overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think it also frames our young people's ideas so severely. Like when you're talking about game, we talk about this often too in the case of Kenya, right? We talk about the big five. So going back to that idea of questioning.
Please, let's talk about the big five.
And the term game itself.
Right. And so, you know, our kids were using this language when we moved to Kenya, and then we were like, well, let's look into this.
The big
Why
five.
is it called game?
Yeah, or game to start
Why
there.
is it called game in the first place? You are killing a beautiful living creature. When did that become game? Number one.
And not for sustenance. Not for sustenance.
Yeah.
Right. And we talk to our kids, well, what do we do for games? Like what is the purpose of a game, right? What is the purpose of sustenance? What is the purpose of sacrificing a living creature for food, for example? How did that become game, number one, right? Think about what that does to a child's mind when you think about...
And whose legacy is that?
Yeah.
And then we think about the big five. And of course, there's a big five in every context, right? But in the case of Kenya, again, why are these... And then come to find out, well, these are the five animals that were most...
difficult to hunt or...
Right. Or you get a badge.
They're like trophies, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's a hunting guide.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it frames the way that a young child thinks about themselves in place on this land and in relation to all of these living creatures. And those ways of thinking, what we understand is they're not our ways of thinking, right?
No.
Yeah.
We've adopted them and they don't make sense to us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an indigenous writer and a scientist, Robin Wall, I believe she published a book entitled Braiding Sweet Grass.
Yes.
And in the opening chapters, she discusses how like English is the perfect language for capitalism because it strips life away from all living things besides humans and puts humans on this pedestal. And from a linguistic perspective, if you refer to the tree, there's no pronoun for it, it's it.
Yeah.
Right? And all living things that are not human, they have this it pronoun, which really puts humans in a separate category, but also strips them of their life.
Yeah.
And she speaks about how in some indigenous cultures, or in the majority of them, they have pronouns for living things that actually place them as kinfolk. So that you understand that you are connected to everything that is living. And now that frames the way that you interact with another living creature if you believe that they're your kinfolk.
Yeah.
That shapes your orientation and your paradigm and your way of thinking and thus your interactions.
Yeah.
Right? And take Swahili, for example. And I'm in no way, shape, or form a Swahili expert, but
He's about to flex on us.
Ninajifunza-
Ninajifunza
Ninajifunza kidogo.
Get ready.
So
We're about
look,
to be embarrassed.
there's a noun class, one noun class, right? And that unifies all living things. So if you were to refer to a tree, you say mti. And then if it's tall, it's mrefu. The M always comes in the conjugation, and that denotes life.
Isn't that something?
You see, and this we try to integrate concepts from other languages when we work with our students to say that there are other ways of thinking. And sometimes one word in another language would require an entire paragraph, if not an essay in English, for you to begin to appreciate it.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay. But what it does is it opens up your way of thinking, your orientation, again, and then ultimately that impacts how you behave.
Absolutely. That's the thing that I think is unlocked for me when you think about that. When your language now reflects life, reflects connection, then your practice does too. Like if it starts there with the very words we speak, and you know, we're all people of faith, and I think, you know, God created the world through words, gave life to the world through words. And so we think the power of words, the power of language is the essence of life. I'm curious, so this kind of understanding takes time and thought and reflection.
Yes.
Some intentionality. How did you guys get like this? Because I'm curious to know, did you grow up with this kind of deep sense of rootedness? And then how do we pass it on so that it is as easy as possible? I'm looking around the room today, like all these young people in front of us, you know, how do they carry this forward in a way that makes sense? When they're with their friends at our cafe, when they are, you know, out on Friday night DJing, some in this people in this room DJ, you know, this life connection, this reflection, this intentionality.
Yes.
So one, how did you get this way? And secondly, you know, how do we live this way in a way that's accessible? You know what I mean?
I do, yeah.
It's never been more accessible, given, you know,
That
the
social
digital
media
age
thing.
that we live in. Yes, but you have to learn to be critical and also filter. But eventually you find your tribe if you're in pursuit, you know, of love and happiness and justice. I want to go back to just touch upon, you know, God, as you mentioned earlier. You know that the Abrahamic religions, all of their sacred texts, the Torah, the Bibles, and the Quran, they're books of stories.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, so even Allah's pedagogical tool is storytelling. You know,
Same with Jesus. Yeah. Parables.
so when we think about hip hop, when we think about reggae, when we think about any cultural element, whether it be fine art or music or dance, these are stories. You know, and there has never been a time where stories are more accessible. And we speak to our students about windows and mirrors, you know, like reflect about all the stories that you've learned in your life. You know, have they been windows into other people's cultures, or have they been reflections of yourself that validate your identity, that make you feel a sense of self-worth? And now you have to curate accordingly. Once you know the capacity and the power and the implications of stories on your psyche, on your being, on your confidence, on your identity, then you take matters into your own hand. By determining what stories you expose yourself to.
Yeah.
Don't even waste 30 seconds looking at a YouTube video that does not validate who you are, you know, or that compromises your sense of worth, or right? And so now you're actively now looking. Am I looking? Do I need a window now? Do I need to learn something about Japanese culture? You know, do I need to feel a little bit more validated? Am I looking to understand something about manhood from my cultural background? What is the role of a father, for example? You know, what stories are available there? And then being mindful of who has the right to tell those stories.
Yeah. Who's this messenger? So I still want to ask, go ahead, Sajda.
No, I just wanted to respond to the question because it made me really think about, well, how did we get to this point, right?
Yeah.
Not that we're, you know, we're at the end at all. We're very much at the beginning of the journey, I think. But I think the short answer to that is oppression, to be honest, right? It really is. Like, it's the pedagogy of the oppressed. It's that when you are in a space of adversity, you become very creative in the ways that you think of, how do I get out of this space, right? And not only that, you are able to connect with people on such a multitude of levels because you see, right? You see oppression here, there. If you're a person, for example, who loves someone who has a mental illness, it changes the way that you look at the entire world, the way that you look at the language in which we address mental illness. If you are a person who has a refugee experience, it changes the way that you look at migration and land and who gets, you know, passports, and all of this stuff becomes a joke to you. You're like, this means nothing, right? If you've never felt that adversity and the pain, it's really difficult then to understand where we're at right now, and to also be able to think creatively of how to dismantle. You wouldn't want to dismantle, right? Because comfort is a lofty place. So I think, to be honest, if I think about my experience as a person whose family fled Sudan, and I grew up in, you know, Toronto area of Canada, and I think about all the people that I connected with so deeply, it was that shared feeling of oppression that made me feel like, you are my kinfolk. Like, I understand, I get it. And then I think too, surrounding yourself by people who will be honest and, again, critical, and who won't forget that feeling, because it's also easy to forget the feeling of oppression. You get a little money, you get a little comfort, and then it's very easy to forget, right? So I think it's those people who will continue to remind you, and I mean people who are living and people who are not living through the texts we read. Those are the people who remind you that success is not, for us at least, it's not measured by how far up the ladder we climb. It's about the liberation of our people. And that's what keeps us continuously, I think. And then again, like when we think about, a lot of what we try to do is unearth a lot of Indigenous views and ways of understanding the world. And practices. And I think going back to the idea of, well, what did our ancestors think about young people? What did they think about our role as stewards of the earth? But also, you know, we're learning so much that I know in my people, Nubian, Sudanese people, the way that they regarded and revered children, literally sacred, right? They really and truly, and we know that across the continent, there are various examples. In the West Africa, they viewed children as so sacred, you wouldn't put a child on the floor, right? All these ideas that, you know, the ancestors are coming back through the child. And so when you also understand that, whether you have your own biological children or not, as adults, we are responsible for these young people. And when we view them as sacred, truly view them as sacred, it allows us to now question all these things we've been told about how adults are supposed to behave around children, or, you know, this power dynamic. And I think that really is the source of all of the issues that we have right now, is that we've forgotten that, like you said at the start of this interview, children are literally sacred and they are the center of our universe, right? I know that for me, that's allowed me to rethink and be very critical of myself as a parent. And Amin and I talk about this all the time, especially as Black African parents. There's all this pressure of like, you know, you're acting too muzungu. You're being too kind. And these terms like gentle parenting and student-centered pedagogy and all of this stuff, we're learning, those are our principles, right? Those are our principles. My great-grandmother used to stand up when a child came into the room.
Really?
Right? So I feel like that reminds us again of what matters right here.
And then also, just to jump in quickly, oftentimes what we think are Indigenous practices are actually not. You know, like we've been brought up with discipline, and sometimes it included violence and so on and so forth. But if you think of our parents and their grandparents, these are the people that on the continent lived under direct occupation, you know? So there's been a tainting of culture there. We need to go a couple generations back to really have a through line and find the authentic ways of bringing up children,
Yeah. We did an episode a couple weeks ago about the case for traditional medicine. And we had a gentleman on from, Ochieng, last time, Vitalis Ochieng. And he's from the Trust for Indigenous Trust and Culture. And Trust for Indigenous Culture and Health and Culture.
He wrote that beautiful book that you gifted us.
He was part of the team. Right. But he said something that then in the comments on social media got a reaction. So we put out a clip where he is talking about as much as there are problems within the culture, there are solutions.
100%.
So if culture has created a problem, culture can also create a solution. And I thought it was quite a powerful thought. And he talked about how they would go around to communities, have meetings, an issue's been raised, there's a conflict here. They have people come, examine the conflict, and then try and find solutions. That's part of the work that the Trust is doing. In the comments, someone had a very fair reaction to that, which is, so these communities that are perpetuating FGM, then if they're the ones to end FGM, how come they're not? Kind of a very fair question, because I think, yes, like you said, there are patterns of violence, there's patterns of oppression within our culture. So as you're parsing out Indigenous practice and culture, I'm with you so much in the sense that there's so much we've lost, so much we should mine for and preserve and treasure. And then there are these other elements that, at least if I look at Ethiopia, we don't really have that excuse of occupation, and we have some practices that need to go.
Yes. Yes.
So when we sit with that, I guess I'd just love to hear your thoughts. Maybe how would you have responded to that person in the comments?
Yes. So as educators and as parents, and we believe as people, we should be constantly engaging in critical reflection. And much of what we do is we say, hey, what do we want to preserve and what do we want to discontinue? Right? And though, for example, a place like Ethiopia was not subject to actual physical colonization, the cultural dominance of the West is vast.
Sure.
And there has been an influence on a cultural level, So it's complex.
Yeah,
and like we
complex.
said, there's no playbook.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if we go back to this fitra word that we discussed at the beginning, your natural disposition, provided that you are doing the work to keep your soul healthy, will tell you intuitively what feels good and what doesn't.
Yeah.
If you've hit your child and you've sensed remorse after, that is your internal barometer telling you something.
Yeah.
Right? So we always fall back on that, the fact that our natural dispositions are in pursuit of something divine, of the right way of doing things. And if it doesn't sit well with you, you have to interrogate it.
And I think too, every society has the right to evolve and be critical of itself and create subcultures, right? Yeah. So I think there's also that too, that we have to remember that we also have the right to do that, right? That within societies, there are always disagreement, and that's a beautiful thing. There's always conflict. There are always going to be people who say, you know what, you've trespassed, right? And a culture is whenever two or more people connect on something, and you will always find that tribe who says, whether it's regards to gender issues or like you just mentioned, this issue of FGM or whatever, there will be people who emerge and say, nope.
Yeah,
nope,
this is not us.
This is not us.
Yeah.
This is a form of oppression. And that's how we learn. So I think, sometimes we put all this pressure on ourselves that as Black, brown people of the 2/3 world, it's either we say everything was the colonizer, and then someone says, oh, wait, what about this one thing?
Yeah.
And then we scramble to try to figure out a defensive kind of response. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say we have the right to be critical and evolve and create subcultures and respond to each other and be in conflict with each other. We have that right as well, right?
So the last time you were here, you said something that we've actually used over and over again. I think you've seen it though, so I don't feel bad that we've used it. But you said that you believe there is joy and justice. And for us, I think it really crystallized what we're trying to do with Selam and Hello, this idea of joy and justice. And we have our own solutions in our hands. A year later, with a new addition to your family, who's grown up a bit. She was here last year too, but such a wee one. Changes in the political space, changes in your own, your Sudan, as you mentioned. How are you feeling about joy and justice these days?
I feel like for me, it goes right back to that idea of what is the alternative? And I think the alternative to not pursuing justice is deep despair. So for me, the joy in justice is, I truly feel joy. I feel like when I see something online with a collective of people who have come together to dismantle systems of injustice, I literally laugh out loud. Like it brings me so much joy from the inside of my being. It gives me that hope. We know that there's so much creativity in that process of finding justice and pursuing justice. But also I feel like I really sit in that space of the alternative is not an option, because the alternative is despair. It is the absence of hope, to just say, we're not pursuing justice and we're going to fold and let this be what it is. So, and I see that a lot in, like I said, in the students that I work with, that spark of hope in knowing that we can fight this no matter how gigantic it seems. That is what is energy giving and life giving, and that's where I find joy. Yeah.
I mean, for us, we talk about this all the time, and it's funny, and I'm in a state of euphoria right now, is that on any given day, we'd rather be the oppressed than the oppressor. You see? And the oppressor is always a minority. That leaves a whole lot of us to party. So in the morning when we get ready, we're playing rebel music, We bump reggae and we bump hip-hop and soul and R&B and Fela Kuti and Mariam Makeba and some Dombolo from the Congo, and we lively up ourselves, and it doesn't get more joyful than that. Because what song does the oppressor have to enjoy?
That's a good question.
Yeah, I guess the rain,
go away. That's the come full circle.
I want to stay with that a little bit longer and thinking about how we do keep our cup full. I'm on social media more than I want to admit. I hate those weekly updates from my phone. Your usage was up 75%.
Yeah, you're like, shut up.
Yes. But, just thinking about how we stay fueled for the fight, how we stay joyful in the middle of pursuing justice. Because there are times when I do open my phone on social media, and as much as I see those systems happening right now, there's so many protests on college campuses in the U.S.,
yes,
in particular around Palestine and the ongoing genocide. But there are moments where I genuinely wail. Like I genuinely throw my phone, and I, like yesterday in particular, I was like, I was just saying, and you're so funny you mentioned about Amharic. I was just saying, like arrive for them, like show up for them. Like it was such an innermost grief I was feeling.
Yes.
And it can be depleting. And I know both of you are quite engaged. Your fingers are on the pulse. You are personally affected by conflict currently. You are also full-time teachers. You're also full-time parents. Give us maybe your top way. You mentioned the morning music, How are you keeping your cup full so that despair does not overtake you in the process of just living day to day?
I know this might sound cliche, but it really does come back to the young people, I think, in our lives, whether it's the students or our children. And I feel like, for people who don't necessarily have children in their household, if you look around, you'll notice that there are so many children around you, right? The children who look up to you, who you are also the steward of. And again, going back to these concepts that we know from our ancestors, that they're all our children, right?
Yeah.
And I know it sounds cliche, but genuinely speaking, it's the children's faces, their eyes. When I see them, I'll just give you an example, because you mentioned Palestine. We had a geography. Sometimes we do very basic skill work. So they had to do a geography quiz, some of my students. And I remember one student was kind of marking down all the names of the Middle East, right? And then he got to this one region, and he basically put in quotation marks, this is the name of the region in quotation marks. And then next to it, he wrote Palestine, and he put a little heart. Because I noticed on that particular map, there was no space for Palestine. The map was created without those marked. So, that alone, I just looked at it and I smiled, and I was like, this little baddie, he went and created a space to put it in. And I know this because that's his lived experience, the body that he's in. He's like, I will create this space on this map. And for me, that's where the hope is. I'm just like, wow, it exists in these kids.
Yeah.
It exists in our own children. And then again, I think about the young ones, but then I also think about the fact that I am blessed to have a mother that is ridiculously hilarious. So when I am in those spaces where I feel like, what is the point? I will call her and she will remind me that, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Just be happy, baby. What's the problem? You know, she will
Yeah.
simplify everything in such a way. And I feel like if everybody could just have that one go-to person
Everyone
that will
had a
remind
haboba.
if everybody had a haboba that just said, please, just, stop sulking, pick yourself up. So I think that's, for me, at least, those are my selfish ways.
I mean, give us some more tools.
Yeah, I think spirituality,
Yeah.
that can take many forms, but spirituality and faith and a deep conviction, in truth, darkness can never contain the light,
Yeah.
And in the Quran, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals 99 names for himself, and one of them is al-haq, the truth. And there's some battles that are God's battles. No human being can fight them on God's behalf. And we know that God does not need help to win a battle.
Yeah.
So like the late Bob Marley said, we emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. Have no fear for atomic energy, because none of them can stop the time.
Yeah.
And that's the truth. And if you contextualize it from a macro scale, like this is the story and the pages are being turned and we're just at a particular chapter with full conviction that it will end with good over evil being victorious.
Yeah.
That gives you peace of mind. At least it gives me peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking, the words of so many of our ancestors come to mind, whether it's Dr. King or Kwame Nkrumah. I mean, these themes of there's a time limit on evil. I remember I interviewed this young woman, Nelly Chaboy, who's the CEO of TechLit Africa, and she won the CNN Hero of the Year a year or two ago. But her mantra is poverty has an expiration date. And it just moved me so deeply. It almost brings tears to my eyes when I think about it. It's like evil has an expiration date.
Yes.
And we have to hold on to that because that's the only way the people who change the world manage to do so.
And there's critical mass. You see that
there is
people are
critical
starting
mass.
to delve deep and dig into the root causes of current state of affairs, the oppression, the narrative that we've been taught for so long no longer flies. It's no longer credible. Nobody believes it.
Yeah.
I want to say too, just in response to Amin, because Amin is, openly saying God and Allah, and he's using these words, and I'm just thinking about the fact that wow, we've come a long way in terms of just being able to speak whatever your truth is. And I know we tell our students that all the time. We invite you to be your full, authentic self. But going back to the question of what is life-giving, it feels so good to be able to say, this is who I am. This is what I feel. This is what I think. These are the words I'm going to use.
Yeah.
Whether you feel comfortable with that or not is actually no longer my problem.
Yeah.
I think that's also has been transformative for me to see so many people collectively doing that.
Yeah.
Say what you want to say in the way that you want to say it, and kind of let go of the respectability politics or trying to, cut everything and make it fit a particular palette.
Well,
that
listen,
is not, it's not for us.
Especially us as immigrants.
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole message was assimilate, sit down, shut up, be grateful.
And, be so cautious of how you express what you deeply feel so that it's packaged in a way that can be heard and interpreted by people who don't care about what you think anyway.
And quite frankly, this is one part of our culture. I know we love our culture. I love my culture. But I definitely think in my culture, there's not you don't get brownie points for speaking up and making a bit of noise about what's right, And so I am grateful for a time and age where we can do that more and more and invite our kids to do the same. As we wrap up, I would love to hear you speak to a couple different groups of people that are on my mind today who are listening to this conversation. And I know I've tried to be careful not to put you guys in a position of always being teachers, because I think that burden is oftentimes on women, on people of color, Black people, Africans, to teach and educate the others. But we're in the majority, so we're talking to ourselves.
To our people, okay.
To our own people. I would love for you to first talk about to young people who are going to pick up TikTok before they pick up a book. As much as there might be fantastic engagement that we can really inspire us out there, give me one or two things that you're saying, you can't be in your 20s and not read X, or not be exposed to the music of such and such, or understand the poetry of. Just give us a couple of those voices that have helped shape your thinking and left an imprint on you. So that's the first group. So let me leave you. Should I give you all the groups?
Let's start with that one.
Let's start with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't mean to be overly theoretical or whatever, but I actually feel that the world of TikTok and Instagram, and this is coming from a person who's not a big social media person.
You're really not.
I'm not, but it's so powerful what is happening, because I feel like they call it the democratization of knowledge. I don't love the term, but I understand what it means, which is I feel like for so long we were told that if it's not written in a text, it's not valid, right? It's not valid knowledge.
Right.
But I've been learning so much from people from Central and South America, from people from Asia, from people all over the world who are actually clearly politicized and are sharing these incredible stories from their ancestors, from their ways of knowing, that I don't think there's a book yet that has written some of those stories.
Yeah, sure.
So actually, in some ways, I feel like young people are almost ahead of the game in some ways, that they at least have the idea that that is valid. Like if you talk to a young person, they're like, yeah, I saw it on TikTok.
Yeah.
Whereas we kind of scoff at that.
Right.
And I think that actually the point is, yes, give power to the people, let people tell their stories.
Yeah.
And sometimes our generation can look at that and say, well, that's not valid. You got to read this bell hooks first, right? So we could I definitely
Our generation,
know that,
as by that you mean me.
right. Well, even me, right? Like I know that Frantz Fanon, for example, when I read his book, Black Skin, White Masks,
it's life-changing.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
It blew my mind. And I remember my professor, God rest his soul, Arnold de Toiru, who is the reason that a big reason why I became an educator. He assigned that book to me, and I remember I didn't read it. It's like, where are the notes on this thing? Like, whatever, Sparks notes or whatever. Yeah, and I remember my TA was like, no. This one you got to go back and read. And I went back and read it, and I understand why. So there, of course, there's The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. There's Bell Hooks' work, Audre Lorde's work. I think that if you're going to politicize yourself, especially as a Black...
There's so many Malcolm X, but I mean also people from the continent,
Yeah.
Kwame Nkrumah wrote a lot, and so did Patrice Lumumba.
Absolutely. And even
Conscienticism?
right, and Steve Biko. I mean, there's so many. But I just I feel like I want to go back and actually say what I believe, which is that there are incredible people telling their stories without having to have written it down in text. And we know that, right?
There really is. Yeah, no, you're bringing to mind so many texts that actually I've relied on ourselves. That when our kids hit middle school years, we were like, my husband is Black American. So we're like, they're not going to get that history in school, being in Kenya. So we met every Sunday for 3 years with other groups of parents of brown, Asian kids to teach them U.S. history from the point of view of our point of view, from the point of view of Black, Indigenous voices. And we did that for 3 years every Sunday. And I'm so glad we did it, because there were some good resources online, but there was not a textbook for this. Howard Zinn has done some incredible work around that. But just hearing you say that, so when you pick up TikTok next, our dear friends out there, I'm not looking at anybody in the room, just looking out there. When you pick up TikTok next, look for, as much as you look for the next trend or the next dance moves, Google, liberation policy in Colombia.
Absolutely.
See what you find, Yeah.
And I think, too, going back to what Amin said, intuition is a way of knowing. So when you are taking in whatever media, you got to sit for a moment and ask yourself, how is this resonating with who I am in place and time? Is this belittling me? Is it empowering me? Is it making me feel that I'm enough in the body that I am in? So what is it actually doing to you in terms of how it's making you think and feel? So I feel like that might be the metric when you're looking at social media. Because we know that you can consume social media and actually you don't feel good after, right? And then you got to question, why is that? Why am I not feeling good?
At all. So this is a different way to think about it.
I would say, instead of thinking about specific resources, think about the principle or the manner in which you curate for yourself, whether it's digital or
print.
Analog, print. And it could be vinyl for it's all text. Film, vinyl, a YouTube synopsis on a text, a podcast.
Yes.
Hey.
Right? Represent.
Hello.
So I think knowledge of self is key, and the colonial and neoliberal capitalist culture, which is Eurocentric, is so dominant, that the majority of us only when you get to a level of critical consciousness and you have the language to even make sense of the hoops you've had to jump through, and the oppression that you face, do you begin now to soul search and to seek. And now what we're realizing with the youth that we work with is that these conversations are happening much earlier. So work that we started to do on ourselves at a university level, students are already doing it in grade 6, 7, and 8.
Amazing.
You see?
Yeah.
So, and of course, with the right guidance, and parents are the first teachers, really. So I would say, mirrors. Look for mirrors that validate, who you are, and then be careful of who's telling the story. Be careful of who's telling the story. If it's not somebody's story to tell, do not even subject yourself to it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So I'm going to give you one more group to talk to before we wrap up here, which is your fellow parents. I know you guys don't want me to get into credentials, so I won't. I won't talk about the fact that you have a master's or that you're highly regarded and all that stuff. It's all true. But you do have some credentials in the terms of parenting.
We have a few, yeah.
You have a few. You have 5 degrees.
We're still working on it. We're still working on it. We don't know if we'll pass or not.
Even me. I'm 21 years in and I'm still like, hiya, Lord, God help me. But speak to parents. I think it can be very easy to be overwhelmed. And I want to actually extend that to not just parents, because someone said to me the other day, in fact, today's episode out around this choice was that women in Africa in particular mother all the time. Whether or not they have biological children that they brought into this world or not, they mother all the time. That really sat with me. I said, it's so true. So speak to people who care for young people, who are in contact with young people. And whether it's a lens, again, a way to think about the world, whether it's a specific resource, leave them with something maybe just to reflect on, something that's meant something to you, that's helped you navigate this last season, something that really anchors you and helps you in that space.
Yeah. I feel humbled by the question because we are young parents, obviously. And so
I'm not saying you've arrived.
No.
Something that just is helping you.
We definitely have not arrived. We are on the journey for sure. But I feel like if I'm thinking about a piece of work that lately I've really been thinking about, and this can give you a concrete text if you wanted one. There is this book called Spare the Child. It's written by a Black American woman. I think her name is Dr. Stacy. I can't remember, but we can look it up. The book is called "Spare the Child: How Whooping Children Will Not Save Black America." I think that's what the text is called. We can look it up after.
Sure.
I bring up that book because, and her work, because I feel like it has had me look very, very closely at how I was raised, and I have very fond memories and a very loving, thank God, a very loving relationship with my parents. But it has forced me to look very critically at what that particular generation thought was acceptable and the norm.
Right.
And I think the practice of being very critical about my own childhood and having to reparent some pieces of me when I'm looking at my own children is what I really took from that book. And she kind of takes us back again to think about the idea that as people of the African diaspora, we've been told a narrative about what it means to be an adult in the presence of a child that has actually it has not been our narrative, and it has diminished the place of the child. And I know that it comes out in me a lot too when I'm trying to discipline my own children. And that's been one area that I feel like, collectively we have a lot of work to do, which is understanding the sacredness of children, right? Yeah. And rethinking how we see ourselves in relation to them. So for me, that's been a really big area. And I think that if I could just say one thing to many parents, it would be like, rethink your own childhood and reflect on that. And what aspects of that childhood upbringing are you very ready and willing to let go of?
Yeah.
And then can we think critically about where did that come from? What is the source of that particular thing, right? And can we be willing to let go? So I feel like that would be the one thing that I would share in terms of what I'm currently looking at on my journey as a parent. I feel like there are so many things, though.
Yeah, there are so many things.
So many, for sure. Thank you for that, though, Sajda. It's such a beautiful thing to invite us to. And it makes me hope that also as people are doing that they have a community to do it with. I think part of the reason you guys are here is because we're in a relationship outside of this, right? So we do this together a lot.
And a non-judgmental community. Because I think also as brown and black people, we can be very judgmental of each other in the sense of like, you're parenting too soft or you're doing this too, you're acting like a white person, right? And when actually it's like, I'm just trying to honor this beautiful human being and I'm not trying to break them. So one thing that writer does say is she says, the whitest thing you can do is beat your child, right? It's like you are doing the work of the oppressor. You are doing the ground. You're laying the groundwork. You just break them down so that they're. And I think oftentimes we do things with such good intention, and we think that I'm just trying to protect them, right? I'm trying to prepare them. Even in terms of schooling, we think that the measure of how we show our love is that we want to make sure they do well in these institutions,
right?
Without having the conversation about how these institutions, historically and present day, have caused harm to us and to our children. And that becomes the measure of which, we're like, go to school, work hard, and that becomes the only showcase of our devotion and care of our kids. So I feel like it's that rethinking again and being super critical and understanding what has served us and what has not and being willing to let that go.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Brother Amin, we always go to you next. I don't know. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Give some time to think though.
I wouldn't want it no other way. There's so many things. I think knowledge of self is important. And for parents, like Sajda said, to reflect about their upbringing, and to determine what traditions do we want to continue, what do we want to let go of. And to really think critically about, hey, what's actually our way and what are ways that we've inherited, as colonial legacies. That's very important. And then dismantling those ways in your day-to-day with your children. And, just thinking critically and trying to liberate oneself and to learn, it takes time. Yeah. And not everybody has the privilege of time.
Yeah.
When you look throughout history, a lot of the revolutionaries and a lot of people put their necks out. And it's true that some people came from the bottom, but the majority of people come from a level of privilege in the middle class where they've had the opportunity and time to reflect. If you're working, yourself to the bone and you can barely get to your kids before they're asleep, this entire conversation becomes removed from you. And so you need this. There's a certain level of privilege that comes, and we acknowledge that. I would say quality time, with our children is most important. Time to get to know each other on a personal level. Time for joy, and it doesn't take much, provided that your basic needs are met. Yeah. And I think the most important thing to remind our children of is that the individual is responsible for the collective, and the collective is responsible for the individual.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's probably, to me, one of the things that makes our tradition so beautifully powerful, and the thing that my entire upbringing was in conflict with in the US was this pull yourself up, and I was like, I can't. The collective has to help me, and so that's such a beautiful way for us to kind of wrap this up. So last time you were here, we asked you what's bringing you joy and all that about your favorite beverages, and you texted me later and be like, I meant to say dawa, I didn't want to say whatever.
Kahawa is king though. We all know that.
So for this series though, we're asking everybody before they leave, what's bringing them hope? Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And so I think about those words around, I think he also maybe meant a bit of hope. It leans towards hope. Yeah. So before we let you go, what's bringing you hope today?
I'm going to let you go first this time.
I'm worried that I might steal yours.
Okay,
hey,
let's
listen.
See. Let's see. I'll let you know.
Have to be
I'll
creative.
let you know if you steal it. You could just edit this, okay? Just reverse so that mine comes first, whatever.
I think the youth.
You guys love those children.
The youth,
you love the youth.
Art, culture, self-discovery.
Yeah.
The youth.
Okay.
That's beautiful. Woo, I feel like I'm just...
That's what I was going to say, actually. So, No, actually, I'm thinking about it. And one thing that I feel like has really been giving me hope lately is that on a global front, we're really seeing that people are turning back to who they are and who their people are on I think, across the globe. I know that I watched this incredible, I think it was a TikTok or something, where this indigenous Mexican woman was talking about, what is that flower? The flower that they
Socha.
use. The flower that they use often in Christmas, you must know.
Oh, poinsettias?
Poinsettias.
Poinsettia.
Yeah.
So she was actually talking about the poinsettia as being an indigenous flower, and she gave the name of it in her indigenous language, and she talked about how it was appropriated and moved and became this kind of iconic Christmas flower. But she said, she's making this movement to reclaim it and rename it its indigenous name. And I was like, this is beautiful.
Yeah.
And it was just a short, quick video that was so informative. And I just felt like this is amazing. So I feel like the more I see people globally turning into themselves, like go ask your grandmother, go ask your, like Amin said, whatever living ancestral connection you can have, the documentation of that and the sharing of it has been such a source of hope for me. And I've told you before, like it makes me want to just go take a recorder and go sit with my grandmother and say, just talk, like just say anything.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you think about anything. Let me just document this. So I think it's that documentation and global sharing of people's stories. And then the willingness of young people to truly embrace. Whereas we grew up in these spaces where we were always trying to, fit in and assimilate and change parts of who we are to make it seem more white, really.
Fit in.
Yeah.
I feel like there's been a reclaiming for a lot of young people where they're like, no, I am Gujarati. Like, this is who I am. I'm Punjabi, and and sharing these stories and incredible.
And I am competent and I am professional.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I don't
Regardless
feel the need to package this in the way that's going to make anybody feel comfortable. That has been a huge source of hope for me.
But I'd like to unify your answer and mine, because I think it's fair to say that we reached a turning point in our journey when we had children and we realized, and you shared this in a story and a poem before, that we could not sing them nursery rhymes in our native tongues. And so that now pushes us to go back and look into and do a self-inquiry for the sole purpose and reason that we can continue the transfer of knowledge.
Absolutely.
So and that is driven by the youth, by our love for them.
Love for the youth and the love for the turning inward. Yeah. You don't have that poem with you, do you, by chance?
I don't know. But really, truly, I was just sharing the moment that I had a child and wanted so badly to sing something to them and found that the only songs I had were these ridiculous songs that didn't make sense and had no place in my mind, right? Like what place, why are you living in my consciousness? Little Johnny or little Arthur, whoever it was. And I remember just being very heartbroken by that. And I think I just wrote this piece about the loss of our stories. And I do know that I again, going back to my mom, I had called her and I was like, Mama, like in this frantic, Mama, what nursery rhymes do you know? She's like, what? I have no time for this. What are you talking about? Those days are over. I'm not singing you a nursery rhyme. And we had a laugh about it. And then of course I explained to her, I'm really desperate. Like I need to know. I need to know because it feels very ugly for me to be singing these songs to these beautiful babies that make. I'm like, I don't know what demons I'm calling on right now when I'm singing. I need to call on something beautiful.
You should have done what Ben Piper did, which was saying, "No woman, no baby, no cry." Yeah, that's what the song for Selam was like.
So
and
we
do that.
We make our own.
Speaking of that, so that's
we make our own at home now.
Exactly.
And I mean, we have a drummer in our house right
exactly.
here.
So we have a singer.
Right, we do actually, and I think that's if I would say one thing that I would share as a parent that has been joyful for me, or that I would love to share, is that idea of if you don't know it, make it up. Create something.
Absolutely.
That's what we're good at, right? So make up those nursery rhymes.
Yeah, we make the path by walking.
Yes,
absolutely. Always a joy. I kind of feel like they should have their own podcast, guys. I don't know. I feel like this is silly that you're coming on to mine once a year. But I think we're going to start a petition to start you guys.
We have workshops. And much of what
Let's talk about Indigenous education, please. Let's give us an update on where you are with the workshops that you have been running all over the world.
Yes.
What's the latest? And if you don't mind, where people can find you.
So that's the part that's a little hard still.
So Indigenous education.
Given our
IndigenousEducation.com.
Yes. To be completely honest and transparent with you, we've actually been thinking lately about how do we. A lot of the work we did was around helping to do professional development with colleagues, oftentimes who are not of our, persuasion, I should say. Yeah. And so what we've actually been thinking about is how can we share and come together as teachers of color, people of color, parents of color? Because what we notice is every time we sit in a room with other brown and black teachers, it's magic. It's like everybody, first of all, is just pouring out their experience, which in itself is therapy and a balm to our hearts. And then the strategies and all of these incredible ways of getting through to our young people. It's just like, it just grows our entire practice exponentially. So we've been talking about how do we do that? And that's some of the things that we're hoping to do in this coming year, is to really pull together parents of color. Really, it's open to everybody, but really specifically talking to our people. We've got a retreat that we're hoping to finalize this year for parents and for educators. And again, really just creating those spaces where we share collectively, because we have so few of them. I mean, as teachers, if you're a teacher out there or a parent, and you look at a lot of parent coaching or workshops for teachers, they often are really absent of so many of the things that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
So that's really what's in the works for us right now.
Okay. We'll be watching closely for that. And when we find out, Selam and Hello people, we will share with you in case you cannot find them.
Yeah. We do be hiding.
We'll be the trumpet.
Yeah,
we'll be the trumpet.
There we go.
Yeah, I think we've taken some time also to delve deep into learning, because it's important also to go back and engage in some introspection, but also see what else is happening,
Absolutely.
and who else is writing and reading. And we've done a lot of learning around the environment, really in the intersectionality between eco-justice and social justice, and the fact that the two are not disconnected, by any form of measure. So we are letting that infuse the work we do with students, and also in our day-to-day practice. We're trying to be more cognizant of that. But ultimately, what we're hoping to revive, and to preserve, and the idea that the genius within Indigenous cultures are worth preserving and integrating into our contemporary educational frameworks, because, the truth is out, and we know that most institutions that we have today, they need, I don't want to use the term facelift, but they need reimagining and redesigning and dismantling, and it's only right, it's only right. And so we truly believe that education is justice, and if you're not teaching towards a world that is more equitable for everybody, then it's really not learning, it's really not education, it's something else. And so ultimately, what we hope we are offering and sharing is beneficial for everybody.
Absolutely. It's kind of how we started the conversation. If you take care of kids, you take care of everyone. So we take care of education, we take care of the world.
I actually wanted to add, if some of our listeners are able or have a nursery rhyme or a story to offer us as a gift for the collective, let's find a way to make it public, either through YouTube comments. I don't know if that's enabled or not.
It is, yeah.
Right? Let's share with one another.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, call out to nursery rhymes. There's actually some people we're going to have on, I think, in a couple of weeks, Uli and Tata's nursery rhymes. I don't know if you've heard about them. They're starting to do this, kind of weave folk tales into nursery rhymes and trying to preserve what they can find.
So beautiful.
And we reached out to them actually, and they said, we would love to be on, but we're like in rural Tanzania, I think, collecting stories.
Wow.
Amazing.
So they're starting to do some of this. So there is some energy around that. I will connect you to them. And in the meantime, absolutely send us a message, send us a comment about a nursery rhyme that you know from your grandmother, your grandfather, your people. Share it with us and we will pass it on. Yeah, beautiful thing for us to be a part of. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. I adore you both. Love you. Bless you.
Love you more, Lilly.
Thank you so much for being here. I don't think that's
you.
possible. I think that we'll fight about how much love is going on between the two of us. 3 of us.
Hey,
7 of us.
There are a lot of us.
There's so many.
You add your 4.
My 4 kids, your 5. There's a lot of people.
It's a lot of love. It's a lot of love, mashallah.
So listeners, so glad you joined us today. We would love to hear your thoughts. You can always reach us on our socials at Selam and Hello. That's Selam with an E on not Facebook, actually. Instagram, TikTok. Guys, help me out. What's
At
our
this
other
point,
place?
you think you had this like...
I'm forgetting. It's
On
been a long day.
everything.
We just try and be out there in those social media streets. Find us. We'd love to hear from you.
If you have questions for these amazing people, send it our way. We'll be happy to share it. And until we see you again, peace.
Worried, anxious group of people trying to move along. Maybe one day we'll get onto something. Until then we say, hold on. I know it's hard, but baby, you just got to hold on.